Hi, I see you're about to become smarter. This video will help you to improve your English language skills. So let's begin.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely means totally. Totally. For example, she trusted him absolutely. She trusted him absolutely. Accidentally. Accidentally. Accidentally means by chance. By chance. For example, his gun went off accidentally. His gun went off accidentally. Accurately. Accurately. Accurately means in way that is correct in all details. In way that is correct in all details. For example, we are simply unable to predict long-term trends accurately. We are simply unable to predict long-term trends accurately. Additionally. Additionally. Additionally means as extra factor or circumstance. As extra factor or circumstance. For example, brokers finance themselves additionally by short-term borrowing. Brokers finance themselves additionally by short-term borrowing. Afterwards. Afterwards. Afterwards means at later or future time. At later or future time. For example, the offender was arrested shortly afterwards. The offender was arrested shortly afterwards. Ahead. Ahead. Ahead means further forward in space. Further forward in space. For example, he had to give his attention to the road ahead. He had to give his attention to the road ahead. Altogether. Altogether. Altogether means completely. Completely. For example, I stopped seeing her altogether. I stopped seeing her altogether. Annually. Annually. Annually means once year. Once year. For example, the prize is awarded annually. The prize is awarded annually. Apart. Apart. Apart means separated by distance. Separated by distance. For example, two stone gateposts some 30 feet apart. Two stone gateposts some 30 feet apart. Apparently. Apparently. Apparently means as far as one knows or can see. As far as one knows or can see. For example, the child nodded, apparently content with the promise. The child nodded, apparently content with the promise. Appropriately. Appropriately. Appropriately means in manner suitable or proper in circumstances. In manner suitable or proper in circumstances. For example, volunteers need to be approachable, calm, and able to respond appropriately. Volunteers need to be approachable, calm, and able to respond appropriately. Approximately. Approximately. Approximately means used to show that something is almost, but not completely, accurate or exact. Used to show that something is almost, but not completely, accurate or exact. For example, a journey of approximately 2 hours. A journey of approximately 2 hours. Aside. Aside. Aside means to one side. To one side. For example, he pushed his plate aside. He pushed his plate aside. Automatically. Automatically. Automatically means by itself with little or no direct human control. By itself with little or no direct human control. For example, the kettle automatically switched off when it boiled. The kettle automatically switched off when it boiled. Backwards. Backwards. Backwards means towards rear. Towards rear. For example, he took a step backward. He took a step backward. Basically. Basically. Basically means in most essential respects. In most essential respects. For example, we started from a basically simple idea. We started from a basically simple idea. Besides. Besides. Besides means in addition. In addition. For example, I'm capable of doing the work, and a lot more besides. I'm capable of doing the work, and a lot more besides. Briefly. Briefly. Briefly means for short time. For short time. For example, he worked briefly as a lawyer. He worked briefly as a lawyer. Broadly. Broadly. Broadly means in general and without considering minor details. In general and without considering minor details. For example, the climate is broadly similar in the two regions. The climate is broadly similar in the two regions. Cheap. Cheap. Cheap means at or for low price. At or for low price. For example, a house that was going cheap. A house that was going cheap. Close. Close. Close means near. Near. For example, they stood close to the door. They stood close to the door. Closely. Closely. Closely means with little or no space or time in between. With little or no space or time in between. For example, closely spaced homes. Closely spaced homes. Commonly. Commonly. Commonly means very often. Very often. For example, a commonly used industrial chemical. A commonly used industrial chemical. Considerably. Considerably. Considerably means by notably large amount or to notably large extent. By notably large amount or to notably large extent. For example, things have improved considerably over the last few years. Things have improved considerably over the last few years. Consistently. Consistently. Consistently means in every case or on every occasion. In every case or on every occasion. For example, the vehicle consistently outperforms some of the best competitors. The vehicle consistently outperforms some of the best competitors. Critically. Critically. Critically means in way that expresses disapproval. In way that expresses disapproval. For example, a designer spoke critically of capitalism. A designer spoke critically of capitalism. Currently. Currently. Currently means at present time. At present time. For example, the price is currently at a premium. The price is currently at a premium. Daily. Daily. Daily means every day. Every day. For example, the museum is open daily. The museum is open daily. Deep. Deep. Deep means deeply. Deeply. For example, traveling deep into the countryside. Traveling deep into the countryside. Deeply. Deeply. Deeply means far down or in. Far down or in. For example, he breathed deeply. He breathed deeply. Deliberately. Deliberately. Deliberately means consciously. Consciously. For example, the fire was started deliberately. The fire was started deliberately. Desperately. Desperately. Desperately means in way that shows despair. In way that shows despair. For example, he looked around desperately. He looked around desperately. Direct. Direct. Direct means with no one or nothing in between. With no one or nothing in between. For example, buy direct and save. Buy direct and save. Directly. Directly. Directly means without changing or stopping. Without changing or stopping. For example, they went directly to the restaurant. They went directly to the restaurant. Double. Double. Double means to twice the amount or extent. To twice the amount or extent. For example, you have to be careful, and this counts double for older people. You have to be careful, and this counts double for older people. Downtown. Downtown. Downtown means in or into such area. In or into such area. For example, I drove downtown. I drove downtown. Dramatically. Dramatically. Dramatically means in way that relates to drama or the performance of drama. In way that relates to drama or the performance of drama. For example, they displayed their talents both musically and dramatically. They displayed their talents both musically and dramatically. Efficiently. Efficiently. Efficiently means in way that achieves maximum productivity with minimum wasted effort or expense. In way that achieves maximum productivity with minimum wasted effort or expense. For example, it is essential to make sure businesses operate efficiently to maximize profits. It is essential to make sure businesses operate efficiently to maximize profits. Elsewhere. Elsewhere. Elsewhere means in, at, or to some other place. In, at, or to some other place. For example, he is seeking employment elsewhere. He is seeking employment elsewhere. Emotionally. Emotionally. Emotionally means in way that relates to person's emotions. In way that relates to person's emotions. For example, an opportunity for parent and child to connect emotionally. An opportunity for parent and child to connect emotionally. Equally. Equally. Equally means in same manner or to same extent. In same manner or to same extent. For example, all children should be treated equally. All children should be treated equally. Eventually. Eventually. Eventually means in the end. In the end. For example, eventually, after midnight, I arrived at the hotel. Eventually, after midnight, I arrived at the hotel. Extensively. Extensively. Extensively means in way that covers or affects large area. In way that covers or affects large area. For example, the house was extensively damaged by the fire. The house was extensively damaged by the fire. Extra. Extra. Extra means to greater extent than usual. To greater extent than usual. For example, he is trying to be extra good. He is trying to be extra good. Fairly. Fairly. Fairly means with justice. With justice. For example, he could not fairly be accused of wasting police time. He could not fairly be accused of wasting police time. Firmly. Firmly. Firmly means with little possibility of movement. With little possibility of movement. For example, the door remained firmly shut. The door remained firmly shut. Forever. Forever. Forever means for always. For always. For example, she would love him forever. She would love him forever. Formerly. Formerly. Formerly means in past. In past. For example, the building formerly housed their accounting offices. The building formerly housed their accounting offices. Freely. Freely. Freely means as one wishes. As one wishes. For example, I roamed freely. I roamed freely. Frequently. Frequently. Frequently means regularly or habitually. Regularly or habitually. For example, they go abroad frequently. They go abroad frequently. Full-time. Full-time. Full-time means on full-time basis. On full-time basis. For example, both parents were employed full-time. Both parents were employed full-time. Fully. Fully. Fully means completely or entirely. Completely or entirely. For example, I fully understand the fears of the workers. I fully understand the fears of the workers. Fundamentally. Fundamentally. Fundamentally means in central or primary respects. In central or primary respects. For example, two fundamentally different concepts of democracy. Two fundamentally different concepts of democracy. Further. Further. Further means at, to, or by greater distance. At, to, or by greater distance. For example, for some time I had wanted to move further from London. For some time I had wanted to move further from London. Generally. Generally. Generally means in most cases. In most cases. For example, the term of a lease is generally 99 years. The term of a lease is generally 99 years. Greatly. Greatly. Greatly means by considerable amount. By considerable amount. For example, I admire him greatly. I admire him greatly. Hardly. Hardly. Hardly means scarcely. Scarcely. For example, the little house in which he lived was hardly bigger than a hut. The little house in which he lived was hardly bigger than a hut. Hence. Hence. Hence means as consequence. As consequence. For example, a stiff breeze and hence a high wind chill. A stiff breeze and hence a high wind chill. Highly. Highly. Highly means at or to high degree or level. At or to high degree or level. For example, a highly dangerous substance. A highly dangerous substance. Hopefully. Hopefully. Hopefully means in hopeful manner. In hopeful manner. For example, he rode on hopefully. He rode on hopefully. Increasingly. Increasingly. Increasingly means to increasing extent. To increasing extent. For example, increasingly, attention is paid to health. Increasingly, attention is paid to health. Incredibly. Incredibly. Incredibly means to great degree. To great degree. For example, Michelle was incredibly brave. Michelle was incredibly brave. Indeed. Indeed. Indeed means emphasizing statement of confirmation. Emphasizing statement of confirmation. For example, it was not expected to last long, and indeed it took less than 3 weeks. It was not expected to last long, and indeed it took less than 3 weeks. Indoors. Indoors. Indoors means into or within building. Into or within building. For example, they went indoors and explored the building. They went indoors and explored the building. Inevitably. Inevitably. Inevitably means as is certain to happen. As is certain to happen. For example, inevitably some details are already out of date. Inevitably some details are already out of date. Instantly. Instantly. Instantly means at once. At once. For example, she fell asleep almost instantly. She fell asleep almost instantly. Largely. Largely. Largely means to great extent. To great extent. For example, he was soon arrested, largely through the efforts of Tom Poole. He was soon arrested, largely through the efforts of Tom Poole. Lately. Lately. Lately means recently. Recently. For example, she hasn't been looking too well lately. She hasn't been looking too well lately. Likewise. Likewise. Likewise means in same way. In same way. For example, the dream of young people is to grow old, and it is likewise the dream of their parents to relive youth. The dream of young people is to grow old, and it is likewise the dream of their parents to relive youth. Literally. Literally. Literally means in literal manner or sense. In literal manner or sense. For example, the driver took it literally when asked to go straight across the traffic circle. The driver took it literally when asked to go straight across the traffic circle. Mainly. Mainly. Mainly means more than anything else. More than anything else. For example, he is mainly concerned with fiction. He is mainly concerned with fiction. Meanwhile. Meanwhile. Meanwhile means in intervening period of time. In intervening period of time. For example, Julie has meanwhile found herself another dancing partner. Julie has meanwhile found herself another dancing partner. Moreover. Moreover. Moreover means as further matter. As further matter. For example, moreover, glass is electrically insulating. Moreover, glass is electrically insulating. Nearby. Nearby. Nearby means close by. Close by. For example, his 4 sisters live nearby. His 4 sisters live nearby. Necessarily. Necessarily. Necessarily means as necessary result. As necessary result. For example, the prognosis can necessarily be only an educated guess. The prognosis can necessarily be only an educated guess. Neither. Neither. Neither means used before first of 2 alternatives to indicate that they are each untrue. Used before first of 2 alternatives to indicate that they are each untrue. For example, unlike her friends, she is neither a snob nor a gossip. Unlike her friends, she is neither a snob nor a gossip. Nevertheless. Nevertheless. Nevertheless means in spite of that. In spite of that. For example, statements which, although literally true, are nevertheless misleading. Statements which, although literally true, are nevertheless misleading. Newly. Newly. Newly means only just. Only just. For example, a newly acquired skill. A newly acquired skill. Nowadays. Nowadays. Nowadays means at present time, in contrast with past. At present time, in contrast with past. For example, the sort of clothes worn by almost all young people nowadays. The sort of clothes worn by almost all young people nowadays. Obviously. Obviously. Obviously means in way that is easily perceived or understood. In way that is easily perceived or understood. For example, she was obviously sick. She was obviously sick. Occasionally. Occasionally. Occasionally means at infrequent or irregular intervals. At infrequent or irregular intervals. For example, very occasionally the condition can result in death. Very occasionally the condition can result in death. Openly. Openly. Openly means Without concealment. Without concealment. For example, he could no longer speak openly of his problems. He could no longer speak openly of his problems. Originally. Originally. Originally means from or in beginning. From or in beginning. For example, potatoes originally came from South America. Potatoes originally came from South America. Outdoors. Outdoors. Outdoors means in or into open air. In or into open air. For example, it was warm enough to eat outdoors. It was warm enough to eat outdoors. Overall. Overall. Overall means taken as a whole. Taken as a whole. For example, overall, 10,000 jobs will go. Overall, 10,000 jobs will go. Overnight. Overnight. Overnight means for duration of night. For duration of night. For example, they refused to stay overnight. They refused to stay overnight. Overseas. Overseas. Overseas means in or to foreign country. In or to foreign country. For example, he spent quite a lot of time working overseas. He spent quite a lot of time working overseas. Particularly. Particularly. Particularly means to higher degree than is usual or average. To higher degree than is usual or average. For example, I don't particularly want to be reminded of that time. I don't particularly want to be reminded of that time. Partly. Partly. Partly means to some extent. To some extent. For example, the result is partly a matter of skill and partly of chance. The result is partly a matter of skill and partly of chance. Perfectly. Perfectly. Perfectly means in manner or way that could not be better. In manner or way that could not be better. For example, the ring fitted perfectly. The ring fitted perfectly. Permanently. Permanently. Permanently means in way that lasts or remains unchanged indefinitely. In way that lasts or remains unchanged indefinitely. For example, his lungs are permanently damaged. His lungs are permanently damaged. Personally. Personally. Personally means in person. In person. For example, she stayed to thank O'Brien personally. She stayed to thank O'Brien personally. Possibly. Possibly. Possibly means perhaps. Perhaps. For example, he found himself alone, possibly the only surviving officer. He found himself alone, possibly the only surviving officer. Potentially. Potentially. Potentially means with capacity to develop or happen in future. With capacity to develop or happen in future. For example, newly available oil might potentially create a drop in prices. Newly available oil might potentially create a drop in prices. Precisely. Precisely. Precisely means in exact terms. In exact terms. For example, the guidelines are precisely defined. The guidelines are precisely defined. Previously. Previously. Previously means at previous or earlier time. At previous or earlier time. For example, museums and art galleries that had previously been open to the public. Museums and art galleries that had previously been open to the public. Primarily. Primarily. Primarily means for most part. For most part. For example, around 80% of personal computers are used primarily for word processing. Around 80% of personal computers are used primarily for word processing. Properly. Properly. Properly means correctly or satisfactorily. Correctly or satisfactorily. For example, ensuring the work is carried out properly. Ensuring the work is carried out properly. Purely. Purely. Purely means in pure manner. In pure manner. For example, act nobly, speak purely, and think charitably. Act nobly, speak purely, and think charitably. Rapidly. Rapidly. Rapidly means very quickly. Very quickly. For example, the business is expanding rapidly. The business is expanding rapidly.
Great! Watch again, practice the sound, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button.